Hey, welcome to Automotive Tech Talk, our podcast. Everything you want to know about automotive. I'm John Gardner. I host Tech Garage and Motorhead Garage on Motor Trend, Revin, and Mav Television. And I'm here with my trusty sidekick, the one and only incomparable Josh Ellis. Josh, you're an ASE Master Certified Tech, but man, you can also turn wrenches. You are the automotive extraordinaire.
That is correct. I am the automotive extraordinaire. and the reason is because I learned under this guy way back in 2006. He doesn't look quite that old yet, but he's getting there. But he still moves around okay.
Yeah, I'm real old. But hey, you know what? That just gives us wisdom. So we're going to talk about engine diagnosing, man. Engine diagnostics. Everything you want to know about your motor, man. A couple of tests you can make. And this is cool, Josh, because they can do it right out of the junkyard. They can go out there and check the actual mechanical integrity of the engine. Mm-hmm. And we always start out with our viewer questions. So let's get right to it, man. You guys, make sure you guys write in down there at johng@johngardnertv.com or just drop it in the comments below. We love hearing from you, and these happen to be engine related. We picked from a bunch of questions you all are sending in, so definitely appreciate it. Appreciate the viewership, appreciate you guys downloading the podcast, and we appreciate you. But Josh, the first one says, my car's shaking and sputtering, mostly when taking off. Help!
Man, if you didn't know anything about vehicles, you might think, man, my transmission's going out. And you start describing this problem to somebody else, and they say, well, it just needs a tune-up. And we're going to tell you why that might not be the best thing for your vehicle.
Yeah, exactly. A tune-up, we say, hey, throw out that red flag. And I know I'm old. I go into a shop. I'm intimidated by the vehicle. Just give me a tune-up. Don't tell me what I need. I don't want to know. I just want a tune-up, man. Spark plugs is going to fix everything. Well, 10 years ago, that was the case. A tune-up would fix everything. But today, that's not the case, man. A tune-up is not going to fix it. We have to get to the root cause and find out what's going on, Josh.
That's right. So we're going to have to do some strategy-based diagnosing. And we're going to show you a couple things you can do to help isolate these issues.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, it could be a check engine light. There could be all kinds of stuff going on. But we'll get into that when we start talking about engine diagnostics. Here's another one. Truck is smoking, most likely when I first start it up in the morning. Oh, smoking's a bad thing.
It is. Smoking's not good for you. It's not good for your vehicle. It's not good for both of you if your vehicle's doing it. But we're going to look at some different color smokes. That's the first question. It's like, well, what color's the smoke? And we'll go from there. Again, we'll help as we get into these things. We'll help you isolate these issues.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That's for sure. Color smoke makes a difference. Black smoke is usually rich, too much fuel. Blue smoke, well, that's oil or oil burning if it's a blue smoke. You could even have a white steam kind of smoke looking deal. That's usually a coolant issue. But there's tests you're going to make. And smoking's not good, but you know what? Neither is drinking Red Bulls. But hey, it's like tech over Red Bull today.
Do you know what taurine is?
I don't.
You might want to look it up.
Now you know why I'm going 100 miles an hour. All right, very cool.
Look up taurine.
Let's look at this engine evaluation, man. We'll start talking about it. You guys, you're going down the road, your car's shaking. It's called what's called a misfire a lot of times. You got a cylinder that's going out. Why do we want to do a tune-up? Well, it could be a coil, it could be a sensor, it could be something, but we really need to isolate the cylinder. What do we mean by cylinders? You have a 2, 4, 6, 8 cylinder, 12 cylinder. I don't know if you're driving a Lamborghini or Maserati, but hey, you could have a real nice one. But we still have to isolate the cylinder, Josh. And in order to do that, we like to run a power balance test, taking that spark away. Let's talk a little bit about a power balance test.
Well, basically, a power balance test is you're basically inducing a misfire. You're taking power away from that cylinder. Well, is that something that you want to do? Well, like John said, you want to isolate it. If it's cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, whichever you may have, you want to figure out exactly what cylinder it's coming from. Once you figure that out, we can figure out if it's air, spark, or fuel, and maybe even fix the vehicle from there.
Perfect. So disable the spark, maybe take your spark plug wire off, ground it. There's proper ways to do it, but if I take the spark plug wire, take the spark away, Josh, and the engine starts sputtering and misfiring, well, that means it's contributing in the first place, right?
Absolutely. If you take the spark away from it, and it changes, and the engine starts surging and bucking and trying to catch up, you know that cylinder, it has spark, fuel, and air. It was doing what it was supposed to do, and you took that away, and now your engine does not like it.
Right, so that's a good thing. But if I take the spark plug away and nothing changes, and sometimes it's so faint, maybe you want to be safe, but you want to go ahead and put a driver in there, put the car in gear, that kind of puts a little load on the engine, and then I pull the spark plug off, and there's no change, Josh. Nothing's happening.
Man, if you take that spark plug off, and nothing happens, you know that cylinder is the one. I mean, you might have two, but you know for sure that cylinder there is not contributing whatsoever.
Yeah, there's one. Bingo. So, yeah, at least you found it, you isolate it, and you made a great point, Josh, and you always do. We're talking about spark, fuel, and combustion. I mean, really, that's the three things that's going to run spark, fuel, and air. We get it in there, we make sure everything's going right. Need about 90 psi. But on our evaluation, when you pull the spark plug out, look at it. Don't just throw them in a mix. That's one of the first things you're going to do. Then we can go to compression readings and cylinder leakage tests and stuff like that. But it's diagnostic work, right? When I'm isolating that cylinder, I'm visually is going to be a huge part of it.
Exactly. You definitely want to visualize that and get in there and see what the spark. I mean, it's not just about spark, fuel, and air. It is, but you have to have good quality spark. You have to have good quality air. You don't. If you have EGR, a stuck open EGR valve, that can be letting exhaust gas go in there. Compression, you have to have compressed air. We'll get into some compression readings momentarily.
Yeah, absolutely. But look at it. Look at the spark plug. See what's going on. Maybe it's soaking wet. Maybe it's real black and sooty with ash. Maybe it's light and ashy. It's a lean condition. Maybe it's super hot and burnt. Lean is too much air, not enough fuel. Rich is too much fuel, not enough air. So I'm going to kind of give a good indication by looking at those spark plugs and seeing what you're looking at. When you pull them out, will kind of give you an idea or direction to go in. So just don't throw them away. Take a look, smell it, kind of look at it, see what's going on, and then you isolate the cylinder. Once we isolated the cylinder, Josh, we can run a compression test. The compression test is basically going to tell us the mechanical integrity of what's going on in that cylinder. This is huge. I mean, I don't have a microscope. I can't just look in there. I don't know what's going on. This is huge, these compression test, cylinder leakage tests. But a compression test is going to help us out, isn't it?
It is. And like you said, 90 psi, your engine should be able to run at least somewhat off of 90 psi, but you definitely want to refer to your manufacturer specifications, because nowadays, just to get more productivity out of your engine, you're going to want higher compression ratios. So you're going to follow those manufacturer specifics, because if the engine's not able to compress, if the piston can't compress, you're not going to get a good combustion, and that's going to affect drivability.
Incredible. Yeah, productivity. That's a great way to put it, because even today's cars, Josh, I may not have, exactly all the power I'm having, but you may not even notice it because they have all this cool technology, variable valve timing and all kinds of stuff going on that's really optimizing that productivity. Great way to put it. So the cylinder, let's just isolate one cylinder, and for our listeners, I mean, a compression test. I want to see how much engine compression is. That's what's squishing in there on the compression stroke. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of blow around the spark plug, unscrew the spark plug. You're really supposed to take them all out, so you have even cranking along the board. And then what you want to do is you want to go ahead and make sure the engine's warm and up to operating temperature. Take all the spark plugs out and put a compression gauge into that cylinder. And if you have a Schrader valve, leave it in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn the engine over to 4 puffs. Da-da-da-da puff, da-da-da-da puff, da-da-da-da puff, da-da-da puff. And that gauge should rise. It should rise up about half the compression on the first one, and then it should raise steadily after that to the compression. Like you said, perfect 90 psi or higher. I mean, I would look in your service manual specification, but they should all be anywhere from 90 to about 150, 200 psi of compression in the cylinders. And what are we looking for? Well, we can look at our chart there. All cylinders are normal, 10 to 15 difference between the cylinders as long as they're within specs, Josh. We got a good running engine.
You sure do, especially if you have an engine that's over 100,000 miles. That's going to be a great indicator that this engine's in solid condition.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you another question. Okay, so all cylinders are low. So now you take a compression reading. Not only is the cylinder we're dealing with low, but all of them are low. If they're all low, what are we looking at?
Man, you could have some valves stuck open in a position, some very bent valves, burned valves. Valve train is usually what I tend to kind of gravitate towards, but you could have some severely worn rings across the entire engine. And we'll get into, I'll let John tell you exactly what you can do. There's something called a wet test that you can do, but that'll also help isolate whether it's rings or something worse.
That's a good one, and that's exactly where I go with it. I'm thinking all cylinders, timing issues, vacuum gauge readings are good too. We can look at vacuum gauge, kind of verify that, but all cylinders would be a timing issue, or just flat out a super tired engine, man. We had a guy come in one time. The engine was so tired that we did the compression test, then we did cylinder leakage test. We blew the rings back so far, Josh, we went to crank it. We had no compression. We had to dump a quart of oil down in there, kind of get it seated, get it up and running again. Smoked like a mosquito killer for a while, but hey, at least we got it running again. But definitely burnt valves, timing chain, something going on with all of them, okay? Let's look at another one here. One or more cylinders are different, just one. So not so much timing. Timing is going to affect them all. But if you just had one cylinder low, boy, that makes pretty much sense.
It does. Again, you could have a burned valve. You could have bad rings in there. And like John was mentioning about the wet compression test, you pour some oil in there. If you have low compression, before you pour the oil in, you're going to want to probably gravitate towards thinking something's valves. But if you pour it in there and it raises the compression, you definitely know you have valves, because you definitely know you have a ring issue.
Right.
Because that oil just filled the gaps that the rings were supposed to fill.
There
and
you
that's
go.
raised your compression.
Yeah, that's called a wet test. Good point. So any one of these cylinders, you can put a couple squirts of oil in, crank it up. If compression comes up momentarily, maybe one or two strokes.
Burn away, yeah.
Yep. And then you know you have a ring issue throughout there, and it could just be a tired engine. But one or more, we're just thinking that basic valve, that engine valve, something going on, that piston, hole in the piston, something isolating that cylinder. Now this is cool, two adjacent cylinders. This is very common, because if I have two adjacent cylinders sharing compression, let's say for my mathematical sake, you had 100 psi, because I can do that pretty easy. I had 50-50 in each one.
Right.
I don't want to do like this weird number I can't divide, or I'd have to go to the math department here at Chipola College and figure out how to do it. But hey, 100's easy. So 50 in this one and 50 in this one, with adjacent, side by side, the one, two next to each other. What's going on there, Josh Ellis?
Sounds like a blown head gasket would be the most common thing, because when one compresses, it's just shooting across to the coolant jacket and then to the other cylinder as well.
Exactly.
Kind of sharing back and forth, like you said.
Sharing back
split
and
the
forth.
difference.
Yep. So you can look for bubbles in your radiator. Be careful. You know, that's your white smoke coming out of the tailpipe. All that cool stuff going on. All right. Compression higher. Ooh, higher is not very likely, but if you had higher than specified compression, and you don't have a turbo or supercharger, that'll do it every time. But if you just have higher compression, then you probably have what?
Carbon buildup.
Carbon buildup, man. That's it.
Yep.
You don't see that much anymore. Cars are so efficient out there. That's kind of a thing of the past. But if it did, or maybe the head was milled or gaskets were milled and it's down lower and it's causing more compression. But we isolated the cylinder. Cool. We did a power balance test. You guys are good with that. We did a compression test. Now we're going to figure out what's going on in that cylinder. Josh, what can we use to do that?
Next thing we'll do, let's do a cylinder leakage test. This is going to
Love
help us
it.
isolate valves and all kind of stuff. Cylinder leakage tests are awesome. It's the next step that you want to do after a compression test.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we don't have a crystal ball, or we don't have a microscope. We can't really look through the steel in there. Sometimes we can use some of our cool infrared technology and some of our cameras and look and see what's going on in the cylinders. But this is going to isolate the cylinder itself. So what are you going to do with a cylinder leakage test? We did a power balance test. Bam, we isolated it.
4 puffs,
Compression
right.
test. Bam, we isolated it. Now a cylinder leakage test. So what we want to do is we want to put it on top dead center of the compression stroke. Both valves are closed. When both valves are closed, I'm going to go ahead and inject air into the cylinder. If I inject air to the cylinder on the compression stroke with both valves closed, the air should go nowhere. It should just stay in there. So what we're doing is we're actually chasing or listening for this air. Where is this air going? And it's pretty simple. If no air is escaping from any of the cylinders, obviously you don't have a problem.
Right, you don't have a problem. But
Nope.
what if I hear air? My question is if I'm putting air into the cylinder and I hear air come in, it sounds like it's on top of the engine, and I take the oil cap off, and now I hear it coming out of the oil cap or dipstick. What would that lead me towards?
Good, yeah, so that's what you're doing. So you got it. It shouldn't be going anywhere. So if it's coming out the oil fill cap, it's obviously going by the rings. As it goes by the rings, it fills up the crankcase, and when it fills up the crankcase, you hear it coming out the oil fill cap. And that's funny because sometimes you get these old cars come in, and the dipstick popped out, and you push it back in, and you start the car, and you run it for a while, and the dipstick popped out. Well, it's blow-by. That's what it is. The car is so old, the rings are so old, that the compression is blowing by the rings into the crankcase, building up crankcase pressure, and when it builds up crankcase pressure, something's got to give, and it blows out the oil dipstick, or you start blowing seals, you start having a lot of oil leaks, and crankcase pressure is not a good thing. You have a PCV, positive crankcase ventilation system, to take care of some of that, but too much is not a good thing. So that's a good place. Oil fill cap, air injected in the cylinder. We got rings blow by.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, cool. And then another thing is like another thing you can look for is, again, when we're putting air into the cylinder, we're trying to see where exactly it's escaping. That's the whole point of the cylinder leakage test. Another place it could be coming is out of the tailpipe.
Yep, and that's a no-brainer. I mean, if it's coming out of the tailpipe, the only way it could get out of the tailpipe is it's coming out the exhaust valve. Well, how can it come out the exhaust valve? We said compression stroke, top dead center, they're supposed to be closed. Well, that means it's either hanging open, it's burnt, or there's some debris in there, or something's going on with the timing that's causing that exhaust valve to stay open. The air we're injecting in comes all the way out and comes out to the tailpipe. So just listen down there with your ear, see if it's coming out the tailpipe. You know you have an exhaust valve problem. So you can do that detective work.
Right, so exhaust valve would cause it to come out of the tailpipe, and then if it's coming by the rings, dipstick, oil filter cap, what about over there near the throttle body in that area, or the intake, if I can hear it coming out of that area?
Or my day, the carburetor.
Carburetor, yeah, carburetor, yeah.
Yeah, carburetor, no, throttle body, your computerized, your air duct system, whatever's going on, even if it's drive-by-wire. Here we go, it's coming out there, good one. So that has to be an intake valve. Just like the exhaust valve was stuck open, burnt, or something going on, something's physically happening with the intake valve, and it's escaping out the intake, back up the runner, and you hear the air coming out the air cleaner itself. That's good. So we got 3 of them down. Could come out a couple other places.
What about bubbles? All of a sudden I hear this bloop, 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 something coming in the radiator, or even in my reservoir, I see little bubbles coming up.
Nice. Yep, bubbles. Let's see, you got a little
Compression
person with
going
straw drinking, blowing bubbles in the radiator. That's a good one. Now,
Gremlin,
getting into the
that's
coolant jacket. How could our air we're injecting into the cylinder get into the coolant jackets? Well, most likely that's probably a blown head gasket. I mean, it's actually going into the coolant, and that's a good one too, Josh, because that's probably one of the most common ones. You lose compression because of a blown head gasket, kind of a result of what's going on. The
Or
car
somebody
may
didn't torque
overheated
something correctly.
or didn't torque something
Right.
correctly. That's absolutely huge. But you know, you can even take your radiator cap off. Be safe when you're cranking the car over, and you're starting to blow out from the radiator. A lot of times that's a blown head gasket, and that gets into a whole nother podcast about symptoms. I mean, you know, it got hot. There's a reason why it got hot. So just replacing the head gasket's not going to fix the problem. You have to get to the core problem. Maybe you have a heater core leaking, or a thermostat sticking, or a coolant system that's all sludged up that caused that car to get hot, and the result was that blown or warped head. So make sure you get to the core problems in them, but that's definitely one of them. All right, and then you got what? Air outside the cylinders or around the cylinders.
Yeah, you can't exactly tell where it's coming from, but you can hear a massive. It's like, man, it's not coming out the dipstick tube. It's not coming out. I don't see bubbles in my coolant. It's not coming out the exhaust. So more than likely, you probably got a cracked cylinder somewhere. It's just blowing by in there.
Exactly. You can hear it coming right outside there. The head's warped so bad. I mean, we put water in cars and it just pours right out. And it's like, hey, I found the problem, but did you find the problem, or did you find the result of the problem?
Right. Another thing you can look for is a lot of times if you're having the cylinder leakage test, check that. You can check the oil. Look at the oil. If you have milkshake oil, you know, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, because your water's getting into your oil, and your oil sometimes, depending on what's more pressurized, is
Right.
getting into the coolant. So that's that milkshaking, you know, looking deal. If you have strawberry, you have a transmission leak
Right.
from the transmission cooler. But these are all good engine diagnostics. I mean, you know, don't just tear it down. You guys want to do a rebuild. Remember, a chain's only strong as its weakest link. So, you know, you put a nice new engine in there, hey, you got 300,000 miles, your transmission's next to go. So you put
Right.
a transmission and an engine in there, your differential starts to blow up, you
just
know.
goes down the line, drive shaft, bearings. Yep.
So go buy a new car.
Yes.
We
That's
don't
how
need
you
a-
put the money into
We
it,
don't
yeah.
need a podcast. Just forget about it. No, there's a systematic approach to do that, and just to make sure you find the root cause. Engine noises, knocks, bearings, you can isolate them as well. I mean, you can put a stethoscope on, go to the lower end, go to the upper end. You can check out where the knocks or noise is coming from. Time and chain versus accessories.
The belts, right?
Yeah, the belts, you can remove the belt, right?
Mhm.
See if the noise goes away. If you remove the belt and it goes away, it was probably on accessory. If you remove the belt and it's still there, ugh,
Yes.
in the timing system.
yes,
Yeah, that gets scary.
That's depressing.
Cool. Well, Josh Ellis, we've talked about brakes on our podcast. We talked about suspension on our podcast, engine rebuild, technicians.
Air conditioning. We've
Air
touched a lot,
conditioning.
yeah.
Oh, man, just check us out. Make sure you guys check us out. Download the podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well. Subscribe, like, share it with all your friends. We got some good information. Make sure you write in, drop it in the comments. What do you want to hear on the podcast? We're a podcast for the people.
Podcast pandemic.
Podcast for the people. Yeah, I need some more Red Bull. Anyway, you guys download it. I hope you enjoyed today, and tune in for more automotive tech talk. Thanks to eDove and his staff for putting it out there. We appreciate you guys.
See you next time.